Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me in this part 2 lecture on Global English. So the last lecture focused on English sort of as a whole. This lecture, we're going to look at English within specific cultures. So it's just going to be country after country after country, and we're looking at how English works for them. Again, if you have any kind of questions or issues, you're always welcome to just stop the video and restart it. Let's begin. So we're going to start with Indian English. Indian English started developing in 1858 when the British Raj, or rule, was established in India. The British imposed their language and cultural ideas on India. English is still used there as an official language, but there are more than a dozen indigenous languages too. Some of the specific features of Indian English make it notable in world Englishes. For example, the use of plural nouns for collective nouns in standard English, like fruits and aircrafts. In this variety, may is used as part of a request or a command, as in, the furniture may be used today or removed today. There's also the universal tag question, isn't it? Applied at the end of sentences, which is not a part of standard English. Our next country, Canada. The English started to settle Canada in the late 17th century despite French dominance, and it was to these settlements that royalists fled after the American Revolution was not resolved in their favor. Even though the Dominion of Canada formed in 1867, Canada still upholds British English as a prestige dialect. Many characteristics of Canadian English share similarities with either American or British English. In pronunciation, General Canadian is nearly identical to General American, but it more closely resembles British English in some of its spelling quirks. So, for example, retaining the extraneous U in words like honor and color. However, the best known trait of Canadian English is the narrative A, which is the sound added to the end of many sentences. This morpheme, and that's what it's called, can be added to the ends of sentences as a way of seeking affirmation or simply for emphasis. I feel lousy today, eh? Or I feel lousy today, eh? Right? Our next country, Australia. Australian English is probably one of the most recognizable national varieties. Australia, we probably all know, or if you didn't, now you're gonna know, started as a penal colony or a prison colony. When the English could no longer send convicts to Georgia after the American Revolution, those sentenced to transport went down under. Eventually, more free colonists, farmers, and retired military personnel immigrated to Australia. Many people think that there's a Cockney influence on the accent. In fact, many of the first English speakers in Australia were from Southern England, especially London. But settlers came from all over the British Isles. Cultivated or mild Australian is a prestige dialect that actually sounds quite similar to received pronunciation, but broad accents are usually compared to Cockney. Australian English is non-rhotic, as is British English. Some quirks of Australian English include the use of she to refer to inanimate objects and using thanks rather than please to make a request. So, for example, can I have a cup of tea, thanks? Another common trait is the use of diminutives, so shortening barbecue to Barbie, shortening present to Prezi, and swimming costume to Kazi, right? Our next country is going to be New Zealand. New Zealand English has a lot in common with Australian English, and in fact, outsiders like you and I would probably have a hard time distinguishing between NZE, which is New Zealand English, from a mild Australian accent. One big difference is that the free settlers, not convicts, who first came to New Zealand encountered a lot of resistance from the native Maori people. In fact, 1 out of 7 people living in New Zealand still identify as Maori, and as a result, there's a lot of mixing between the lexicons. Next up, we're going to look at South African English. South African English is rather more complicated than Australian or New Zealand English. The first English speakers settled in South Africa in the early 19th century, but the area had been occupied by the Dutch since the 17th century, and in 1899 the Boer War started over disputes between foreign powers. English grew to dominance in many areas of life in South Africa, but Afrikaans was used by a large portion of the population as well. So Afrikaans is the language. Afrikaans is a native language to South Africa developed from the original settlers Dutch. Afrikaans bears an association with the apartheid era and racial intolerance, so many people prefer to use English. There are 3 varieties of South African English, ranging, as in many other countries, from the prestige dialect, so conservative and respectable South African, to the stigmatized accent of the lower class, so extreme South African. Finally, I want us to look at Caribbean English. When it comes to Caribbean English, understand that we are talking about a wide range of islands with a wide range of colonial influences. Many European merchants and slave traders would seek port in Caribbean islands, and their native peoples would encounter the European languages as well as West African languages of the kidnapped Africans. So to communicate despite these linguistic barriers, pidgin languages developed, and these eventually turned into creoles, or commonly used languages bearing similarities with the other present varieties. And so with the increase in Britain's power and the spread of Britain's power came the increase in British English's prestige as a dialect. And in fact, in Caribbean English, English is now the official language of several Caribbean countries, and not all of them were originally British holdings. Okay, I know we flew through those countries, but like I said at the beginning, go back, listen to this again if you need to. As always, email me if you have any questions, and have a great day.